I never imagined that one lonely Tuesday evening could tear my heart to shreds. As the sun bled its final oranges and crimsons across a darkening sky, I sat frozen in the back seat of our battered Chevy, my soul aching with the bitter taste of betrayal. Owen's cold ultimatum, demanding that I hand over my grandmother's treasured villa, the very symbol of all I had ever loved, echoed in my ears like a cruel taunt. In that harrowing moment, every tear that streamed down my face carried the weight of broken promises and lost dreams. I felt utterly abandoned, stranded not only on the side of a desolate highway, but also in a life that suddenly seemed empty and meaningless. And yet, amid the overwhelming despair, a fierce and defiant spark ignited within me. A quiet vow that I would rise from the ruins of this shattered past and reclaim the dignity and hope that were rightfully mine. My name is Celeste Ward, and at 36, I had learned to treasure both my independence and the roots that anchored me. I worked as a freelance digital illustrator, a job that allowed me the freedom to create, express, and, most importantly, remain true to myself. I was married to Owen Carter, a man in his early 40s whose charm and ambition had once swept me off my feet. But over time, the foundation of our relationship had grown brittle. His controlling nature and relentless demands gradually eroded the mutual respect we once shared. Yet, I clung to the hope that love might somehow conquer these growing fissures until that fateful night. That Tuesday had begun quietly enough. I spent the late afternoon in our kitchen, where the fading light of summer spilled through the tall, narrow windows. I was busy preparing dinner, a rich, hearty stew bursting with local vegetables and fresh herbs I'd gathered from our garden. The comforting aroma of rosemary, basil, and roasted garlic filled the space, transporting me back to childhood afternoons spent with my grandmother in the very same kitchen. I stirred the bubbling pot slowly, my mind adrift in bittersweet memories, when Owen's voice cut through my reverie. "Celeste, we need to talk," he said, his tone unexpectedly cold. I turned to him from behind the counter, noticing for the first time the tense set of his jaw and the hard glint in his eyes. He sat stiffly in the aging sedan, a battered old station wagon that had seen us through many years of our life together. We were returning from a visit to my mother's house in the nearby town of Fairhaven, a trip that was usually filled with gentle conversation and familiar comforts. But now, the car's interior felt charged, as if a storm were gathering behind the wheel. "Talk?" I echoed, heart thumping wildly. "Owen, what is it?" He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he gripped the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles blanched. After a long, heavy pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and edged with something I couldn't yet name. "My sister, Veronica, she's just graduated from architecture school. She needs a place to live. And I'm telling you, you're going to sign over the house to her. Either that, or our marriage is over, right here, right now." The words hit me like a blow. I froze, my hand still stirring the stew as if time had momentarily halted. "What?" I whispered, barely believing what I had just heard. My voice trembled as I repeated, "You want me to give away the house, our home?" Owen's eyes were fixed on the road, but I could feel the intensity of his conviction. "Yes," he said matter-of-factly, as though discussing a mundane detail like the weather. "Veronica needs this. It's for tax benefits, for her future. And you've done nothing but idle around. You've always been so comfortable. Celeste, it's time someone put this property to real use." My heart pounded in disbelief. Every memory of that house, the hours I spent repainting its walls, the weekends tending the rose garden, the countless nights poring over design magazines to make it a true home, came crashing down around me. "Owen," I said, my voice growing steadier as I fought back the rising tide of anger and sorrow. "This house is my inheritance. It's not just bricks and memories, it's my soul. I will not sign it over to Veronica." At that moment, a deep silence fell over our car. The picturesque sunset outside, blazing hues of orange and pink lighting the horizon, seemed almost mocking against the cold reality unfolding within. I looked over at him, searching his face for any trace of the man I'd once adored. But all I saw was a stranger. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed ahead with steely determination, and in that unyielding gaze, I realized how little trust remained between us. Without warning, The car's tires screeched as Owen slammed on the brakes. We were on a deserted stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway, far from the safety of civilization. The abrupt halt sent my body lurching forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest. I barely had time to process the sudden shift in momentum before Owen's voice exploded through the tense silence. "Sign it. Celeste, do it now or our marriage is over." A cold, bitter sensation pooled in my stomach as his ultimatum echoed in my ears. The house, our home, the very symbol of my past and my dreams, was now the battleground for our failing love. I felt as if I'd been punched in the gut. My vision blurred with tears as I met his gaze briefly, an expression of fury mixed with something I couldn't quite decipher. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the moment shattered. Before I could gather my thoughts, Owen stormed out of the car. I sat frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. In a heartbeat, he yanked open the passenger door, swung it wide, and barked, "Get out!" His face was contorted with rage as he stepped out onto the dark, lonely highway. "Figure your way home. Celeste, I don't need you here if you won't do as I say." I watched, numb and disbelieving, as the taillights of our car faded into the gathering darkness. The ocean, usually a constant, soothing presence in my life, now seemed distant and indifferent. Alone on the side of the road, under a sky slowly turning from twilight to pitch black, I felt an overwhelming mix of betrayal, heartbreak, and an unexpected spark of determination. For a long while, I sat there, the cold night air biting at my skin. My mind raced with memories, how Owen and I had met at a sun-drenched art festival in Santa Cruz, laughing as we wandered through colorful galleries, promising each other a lifetime of shared dreams. I recalled our wedding day, the radiant joy, the tearful vows, the hopeful glances we exchanged as we embarked on a future together. How had those moments crumbled into this desolate, painful reality? When had the man I loved become capable of such cruelty? I mustered all the strength I had left and unbuckled my seatbelt. With trembling legs and a heart heavy with sorrow, I stepped out of the car onto the cold asphalt. My heels clicked against the highway, the sound echoing into the vast silence of the night. I began to walk, each step feeling like a painful farewell to the life I had once known. I did not know where I was going, only that I could not go back. After what felt like an eternity, a car slowed down beside me. In the beam of its headlights, I saw the silhouette of an older woman leaning out of the window. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked softly, her voice a gentle contrast to the harsh darkness around me. I hesitated only a moment. My entire life had been taught to be wary of strangers. But in that desperate moment, her kind face and warm eyes were a beacon of hope. "Yes, please. Could you give me a ride?" I managed, my voice barely audible. The woman smiled kindly, unlocking the doors. I climbed into the back seat, shivering not just from the cold, but from the shock of the betrayal. Next to her sat a man, perhaps in his mid-50s, with a calm, reassuring presence. They introduced themselves as Linda and Robert. Linda's eyes were full of compassion as she gently patted my hand. "You know, sometimes men do foolish things. Dear, let's get you to a safe place." They drove me to the small town of Seabright, where I was taken in by my dear friend Elena, a strong, compassionate soul who had been my confidant since college. Elena's home, a modest apartment above a bustling little cafe in downtown Seabright, became my refuge that night. When I arrived, she didn't waste a moment. "Celeste, come inside," she said, ushering me in with open arms. Once safely inside, I collapsed onto her couch as tears streamed down my face, recounting the events of that harrowing night. Elena listened intently as I recounted every detail, from Owen's cold ultimatum to the moment he abandoned me on the side of the road. As I spoke, a mixture of sorrow and simmering anger took root in me. "I won't let him take everything from me," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I'm not his property. I'm not a pawn in his twisted game." That morning, as the first light of dawn broke over Seabright and Elena prepared breakfast with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, I realized that I had reached a crossroads. I had been left with nothing but the remnants of a broken marriage and the inherited house that meant everything to me. But I also had something else, a fierce, undeniable resolve to reclaim my life. I made a silent promise that day. I would never allow Owen to strip me of my identity, my heritage, or my self-worth. Over the next several days, with Elena's unwavering support, I began the painful process of disentangling myself from the life I had known. I contacted a trusted lawyer, James Calloway, who specialized in divorce and property rights, and explained everything. When I told him about the house, my grandmother's beloved villa perched on the cliffs overlooking Solera Bay, and how Owen had demanded that I transfer it to his sister, his expression turned grave. "Celeste," he said softly, "this is not just about a house. It's about respect, trust, and the recognition of your rights. We're going to fight this, and you'll have every legal tool at your disposal." I also began to secure my financial future. In the dead of night, while Owen remained oblivious to my secret preparations, I transferred a substantial portion of our joint savings into accounts solely in my name. I gathered every document that proved the house was my inheritance, the fated will, the property deeds, the old photographs of my grandmother proudly standing in front of the villa. Each paper I handled felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. Yet, even as I took these practical steps, my heart ached with questions. How had the man I trusted, Owen Carter, the man I had once loved so deeply, fallen so far from the person I thought I knew? I spent long hours wandering the empty corridors of my childhood home, recalling happier times and wondering when everything had gone terribly wrong. I replayed memories of our early days, when his eyes sparkled with promise, when his laughter was genuine and warm. But those memories were now tainted by the sting of his betrayal and the cruelty of that fateful evening. One late afternoon, as I sat in the quiet solitude of my friend Elena's apartment, I resolved that I would not let this ordeal define me. I pulled out a battered journal, the same one I had filled with sketches and dreams before my marriage, and began to write. Page after page, I poured out my grief, my anger, and, slowly, my hopes for the future. I wrote about the legacy of my grandmother, the house that was not just a physical structure but a symbol of the life I had built, and the pain of watching it used as a bargaining chip in a loveless, controlling marriage. With every word, I felt a little more of my strength returning. Determined to regain control of my destiny, I made plans to confront Owen and ensure that my rights and my home would not be taken from me. I arranged to meet him at our house, the very place that now felt like both a museum of my past and a battleground for my future. With trembling hands and a heart full of determination, I drove back to Solera Bay the following morning. The drive was a blur of emotions. As I approached the familiar winding road along the cliffs, my pulse pounded in my ears. I remembered the sunsets over the ocean, the gentle sound of waves crashing below, and the memories of laughter that had once filled those halls. But now, that same road had witnessed my abandonment, my humiliation, and the beginning of my journey to reclaim everything I had lost. When I arrived at the villa, the atmosphere was eerily silent. The once familiar facade now seemed cold and unwelcoming. I parked my car and stepped out, clutching my bag tightly as if it were a lifeline. I fumbled with my keys at the heavy oak door, my mind reeling with anticipation and dread. Slowly, the door creaked open, and I stepped into the empty, echoing rooms. My heart sank as I realized that Owen had already begun to strip away the personal touches that had made this house my home. Family photos were missing. Cherished heirlooms had vanished, and even the scent of lavender from the garden seemed to have been replaced by an unsettling emptiness. I wandered from room to room in disbelief, each step a painful reminder of how much was being taken from me. In the living room, where once laughter and conversation had filled the space, there was now nothing but silence and bare walls. The dining table, where we had shared countless meals and celebrations, was covered with moving boxes and the debris of a hurried departure. I sank into a chair and closed my eyes, letting the reality of my situation wash over me. Tears streamed down my face as I realized that this was not just the loss of a house. It was the loss of a lifetime of memories, a sacred inheritance, and a part of who I was. Determined not to let despair claim me, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, James Calloway. "I want to ensure that nothing happens to my home," I said with quiet, steely resolve. "Owen cannot just sell it or transfer it away from me. Over the next few days, With legal consultations and careful planning, I began to secure every right I had. I gathered all the documents that proved the villa was mine by inheritance. I froze our joint accounts, and I set up meetings with experts who could help me navigate the legal labyrinth that lay ahead. Meanwhile, my friend Elena and I reached out to our community, neighbors, local business owners, and even the friendly faces at the nearby cafe to spread the word and gather support. Many had always admired the beauty of my grandmother's villa and knew it as a landmark of Solara Bay. Their encouragement gave me strength, a reminder that I was not alone in my struggle. Over cups of steaming coffee and late-night conversations, we began to discuss not only how to fight for my home, but also how to transform this painful chapter into something positive. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in magnificent shades of purple and gold, Elena suggested an idea that would change everything. "Celeste," she said softly, "what if you turned this house into something more than just a battleground? What if it became a sanctuary for others who have faced betrayal and loss, a place where people can rebuild their lives?" The idea struck me like lightning. I thought about all the nights I had spent alone in that empty house, all the tears I had shed, and all the silent vows I had made to myself. I realized that even though Owen had tried to strip me of my legacy, I still had the power to redefine it. "Phoenix House?" I whispered, almost to myself, as the image of a rising phoenix, a symbol of rebirth and renewal, filled my mind. "That's it. We'll call it Phoenix House." In the weeks that followed, Elena and I embarked on a mission to transform the abandoned villa into a safe haven for survivors, a place where the broken could come together, share their stories, and find the strength to rise again. With the support of the local community, I began repairing the damage not only to the physical structure of the house, but also to the spirit of my own heart. Volunteers showed up to help repaint walls, clean up debris, and restore cherished details that still lingered in every corner. As I worked side by side with neighbors and kind-hearted strangers, I discovered that every stroke of a paintbrush, every piece of furniture restored, was a step toward reclaiming my life. I started a modest blog where I shared my journey from betrayal to rebirth, detailing the legal battles, the heartbreak of being abandoned on the side of the road, and the triumphant steps I was taking to rebuild. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support and personal stories from others who had suffered similar fates flowed in, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. One particularly moving day, as I was arranging fresh wildflowers in a vase in the newly renovated living room, I received a call from James Calloway. "Celeste," he said, his tone both professional and compassionate, "we have a major breakthrough. The evidence we've gathered proves that Owen not only attempted to force you to transfer the house, but has been siphoning funds from your joint accounts for years." The revelation hit me like a tidal wave, betrayal on multiple levels. I felt a surge of both anger and relief. At last, the full extent of his deception was coming to light. Armed with the legal evidence, we pressed forward with our case. I appeared in court to testify about the abuse, the financial misappropriation, and the betrayal that had left me stranded on the side of the road that night. With each word I spoke, I felt the weight of my past lifting, replaced by a fierce determination to reclaim my future. I was no longer the timid, broken woman who had once believed that love meant sacrificing everything. I was a survivor, and I would no longer be defined by someone else's cruelty. After a long, grueling trial, the verdict was delivered. Owen was found guilty on all counts, sentenced not only to repay the misappropriated funds, but also to serve time for the emotional and physical abuse he had inflicted. As I walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by reporters and the supportive cheers of my newfound community, I felt an indescribable sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I was the master of my own destiny. In the months that followed, Phoenix House began to take on a life of its own. We held support groups, workshops on financial independence and healing, and even art therapy sessions that brought together survivors from all walks of life. I found purpose in sharing my story and, in doing so, helping others rise from the ashes of their own broken dreams. Every day, as I gazed out over the Pacific from the refurbished terrace, I was reminded that while the pain of betrayal would always be a part of me, it no longer defined me. I continued to work with the interior design firm that had once offered me an internship, channeling my creativity into transforming spaces and rebuilding lives. My blog flourished, and soon I was invited to speak at local events and on radio shows, sharing my journey of heartbreak, courage, and renewal. I even met new friends, people who understood the scars and celebrated the strength it took to overcome them. Among them was a gentle soul named Marcus, who, like me, had known loss and was learning to love life again. His quiet humor and unwavering support slowly helped me see that even after the deepest betrayal, love could find a way back in, this time, on my own terms. The transformation of Phoenix House culminated one bright spring morning when we held the official opening ceremony. The old villa, once stripped bare of its cherished memories, had been reborn into a vibrant haven. Freshly painted walls, handcrafted decor, and community art installations filled every room. Residents, each with their own story of pain and recovery, gathered in the grand foyer, their eyes filled with hope and determination. I stood before them, heart pounding as I addressed the crowd. "Welcome to Phoenix House," I began, my voice steady and resolute. "This is more than just a building. It is a promise that no matter how dark our past may be, there is always the opportunity to rebuild, to reclaim our dignity, and to create new, beautiful memories. Today, we stand together as survivors, as creators, as a community of hope. Let this place be the beacon that guides us to our new beginnings." The applause that followed was not just for my words. It was for every soul in that room that had ever been broken and had chosen to rise again. In that moment, I knew that I had finally reclaimed my power, not only for myself but for everyone who had ever felt abandoned, betrayed, or lost. As the seasons changed, my life began to settle into a new rhythm. The painful memories of that fateful night and the road that followed became the foundation upon which I built a future filled with purpose, creativity, and compassion. I learned that true home is not defined by walls or possessions, but by the strength to overcome, the will to rebuild, and the community that stands by you in the darkest times. Now, whenever I catch a glimpse of the ocean from the terrace of Phoenix House, I'm reminded of the tumultuous journey that led me here. The pain of being abandoned on the roadside, the shock of betrayal, and the bitter taste of lost trust have all become chapters in the story of my rebirth. I have learned to embrace every scar as a symbol of my resilience, a mark of a battle fought and won. And as I continue to help others find their way, I find that the house that was once a battleground has become a living testament to the indomitable power of hope. This is my story, a story of heartbreak, of the courage to stand alone on a cold highway, of the fierce determination to reclaim what is rightfully mine, and of the ultimate transformation of pain into purpose. I share it now in the hope that anyone who finds themselves betrayed or abandoned will know that there is always a path to healing, a way to rise like a phoenix from the ashes, and a future waiting to be built with love, strength, and unyielding hope. I am Celeste Ward, a survivor and a creator, and I have learned that no matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes, and with it, the promise of a new beginning.